January 31st, 1940, a small town in Vermont buried in snow. 6 inches fell overnight. It sits on the church roof, on the porch rails, on the shoulders of a mail wagon parked outside the post office. Wood smoke climbs straight up from a dozen chimneys into air too cold to bend it. Somewhere a screen door bangs once and goes still. A retired legal secretary named Ida Mae Fuller steps out onto that porch, pulls her coat tight at the collar, and starts down the cleared path toward the post office, boots crunching, breath showing white, one gloved hand trailing the handrail out of habit more than need. She is walking unremarkably into history. Waiting for her behind the counter is an envelope from the United States government. Inside it, a pale green check for $22.54. Treasury seal watermark, a typewritten name, and in the corner a serial number that had never been used before, still sharp-edged from the press that struck it that week. Check number 00-000-001. The first Social Security retirement check ever paid, the first installment of the biggest promise any government has ever made to its own people: work now, and your old age will be safe. Here is what makes Ida Mae Fuller the perfect place to start this story. She had paid into the system for exactly 3 years. Her total contribution, every payroll tax deduction she ever made, came to $24.75. Then she lived to be 100 years old. By the time Ida Mae died, she had collected almost $23,000. She put in $25,000 and took out $23,000, a return of roughly 92,000%. The best deal in the history of pensions handed to the very first person in line, and that is not a scandal. It is not a fraud. It is exactly how the machine was designed to work, and the reason it worked for her is the same reason it is now slowly and politely breaking for you. Because here is the part nobody put on the poster. Retirement, the idea that you work for 40 years and then the money keeps coming, is not ancient. It is not natural. For most of human history, it simply did not exist. You worked until your body failed, and then you prayed your children could afford you. The thing you are counting on is an invention. It is about 125 years old. It was invented by an aristocrat who wanted to crush socialism, expanded by a railroad that wanted obedient workers, nationalized by a government terrified of an army of angry old men, and then in 1978, quietly rewired by 2 paragraphs of tax code that nobody in Congress even debated. You were promised a retirement. In the next 90 minutes, we are going to read the actual contract. As always on this channel, we will separate what is documented, what is exaggerated, and what is invented. And this episode's ledger is personal, because the myths here aren't about a family in Frankfurt or a hotel in the mountains. They're about the numbers sitting in your own account, and the check your government has scheduled, and the date, roughly a decade from now, when the arithmetic says the promise gets rewritten again. This is Fortuna's wheel. Episode by episode, we've watched the wheel lift dynasties and crown the dollar. Tonight, the wheel turns toward the only fortune most people will ever own, the last 20 years of their own life. Myth and record. The claims on the table, you've heard most of them. That retirement age was set at 65 because that's when people conveniently died. A cynical trick by governments that never expected to pay. That Social Security is a Ponzi scheme. That the government stole the trust fund, raided it, spent it, left an IOU in the drawer. That the 401k was scientifically designed as the modern answer to your retirement, and that the whole system is going bankrupt, that people under 50 will get nothing at all. Every one of those claims contains a splinter of something true. Not one of them survives contact with the record intact, and some of them were manufactured. We'll show you where and by whom and what they were selling when they did it. Our sources this time are unusually close to home. The Social Security Administration keeps a historical archive that would embarrass most governments. The actuarial memos, the committee transcripts, even Ida Mae Fuller's file. We have the congressional record for every major rewrite: 1935, 1939, 1950, 1974, 1978, 1983. We have the trustees' reports, published every year, with the uncomfortable tables politicians prefer not to read aloud. And for the strangest chapter, the accident that created the 401k, we have the testimony of the man who did it, who is on the record repeatedly saying it turned into something he never intended. One promise of our own before we start: this episode walks straight through the middle of your personal finances, and the temptation in this genre is to end every chapter with a sales pitch or a panic attack. We will do neither. We are historians, not financial advisors. Nothing tonight is advice. Our job is the ledger: what was promised, what was delivered, what was quietly rewritten while everyone was watching something else. To read that ledger honestly, you have to start before the first page. You have to visit the world where retirement did not exist. The world before retirement. Picture America in 1880. Dust on a dirt road, a horse-drawn plow cutting one straight furrow after another, a mill town with its stack smoking against a flat gray sky. Now find an old man in it, 65, maybe 70. Where is he? He is working, almost certainly he is working, bent over the same plow handle or standing at the same lathe, hands mapped with the same calluses they've carried for 40 years. In 1880, roughly 3 out of 4 American men over 65 were still in the labor force, not because they loved their jobs, because the alternative had a name and everyone knew it, and we'll visit it in a few minutes. This is the honest starting point for any history of retirement. The word barely had a use. The word retirement existed, but it described something rare, a state for the landed, the lucky, and the finished. A farmer might slowly hand the plow to his sons and keep a room by the kitchen. A merchant might sell the shop. But the idea that an ordinary working person would one day stop earning, keep eating for years, that idea would have sounded like a fairy tale and not a kind one. The old survived the way they had survived for 10,000 years, through the family ledger. You raised children and the children were the pension. You fed them for 20 years. They fed you for your last 10. Economists have a dry name for it, the intergenerational contract. But every farmhouse knew it as simply the way things were. The old man got the chair by the stove because he had earned it, and because the house had been his, and because his son knew his own turn was coming. Then the factories came and the contracts started to tear. Industrial America had no chair by the stove. A machine shop paid for speed, eyesight, and hands that didn't shake, and it discarded what it could no longer use. A farmer aged into lighter work on his own land. A steel worker aged into the street. Families packed into city tenements had no spare room and no spare bread. The children had moved for work, sometimes an ocean away. And industrial work itself broke bodies faster. Mills, mines, and railroads chewed through men. The ones the machines didn't kill, they wore out early. For the first time in history, societies were producing large numbers of old people with no land, no trade, no family within reach, and no way to earn. The 19th century looked at this new kind of poverty and gave it an institution, not a pension, a building. Over the hill to the Poorhouse. In 1872, a Michigan poet named Will Carleton published a set of verses that became one of the most famous poems in America. It was called Over the Hill to the Poorhouse, and it is spoken in the voice of an old woman whose grown children, one by one, decide they cannot keep her. It ends where the title says, "It ends." The poem became a sensation, recited in parlors, set to music, eventually filmed, because every American who heard it recognized the road. The poorhouse was real. Nearly every county had one: the almshouse, the poor farm, the county home. It was where you went when the family ledger failed. And through the late 19th century, its population was quietly transforming. The drifters and the destitute young were being replaced bed by bed with the old. Understand what the poorhouse was, because it is the negative space this whole episode is drawn in. It was not a pension, and it was not a hospital. It was a warehouse run at the lowest cost the county could manage, and it was designed to be feared. Reformers of the era said so openly, "Make relief comfortable, and you invite idleness." The dread of the poorhouse was considered a public good, a spur to thrift, to family duty, to working one more year on a bad hip. So the elderly of industrial America lived under a simple regime: work as long as your body allows, lean on your children if you have them, and behind everything, over the hill, the gray building waiting. Keep that building in your mind for the next 80 minutes. Every pension scheme, every act of Congress, every acronym in this story, all of it is, at bottom, a promise that the building will stay closed. And whenever you hear someone say that people were simply tougher back then, that families simply took care of their own, that the old country ways worked fine before the government interfered, remember that the era they're describing kept a poorhouse in nearly every county and filled it with grandmothers. The record is the record. But fear, as we learned 2 episodes ago on a Georgia island, is also a builder. And the first thing it built, in America, was the strangest pension system in the world. One that arrived not from charity and not from planning. It marched home from a war. The army that grew old. America's first mass retirement system was never designed. It was enlisted. When the Civil War ended in 1865, the Union owed something to hundreds of thousands of maimed soldiers, widows, and orphans, and it paid. Pensions for wounds, pensions for the fallen, strict, limited, tied to the war itself. Then the veterans did something no actuary had planned for. They got old, 1 million of them, all at once, all organized. The Grand Army of the Republic, the great Union Veterans Association, became one of the most formidable lobbies the country has ever seen. It held parades, it held votes, and year by year, election by election, the definition of a war-related pension stretched. A bad back at 60, surely the march to Atlanta did that. Failing eyes, weak heart, the war, the war. In 1890, Congress stopped pretending. The Dependent Pension Act granted a pension to virtually any Union veteran who had served 90 days and could no longer do manual labor, and old age itself soon counted as the disability. With one law, America had created, almost by accident, an old age pension covering a huge share of the elderly men of the North. Picture the machinery of that number: clerks at rows of oak desks under gas lamps, ledgers stacked shoulder high, brass-buttoned veterans in their Sunday coats lined out the door of the Pension Bureau clutching affidavits. The numbers still astonish. By the mid-1890s, military pensions were consuming, by some counts, roughly 40% of the entire federal budget. $4.10 flowing to old soldiers and their widows. The Pension Bureau's building in Washington was for a time among the largest brick buildings on Earth. There were agents and attorneys who did nothing but manufacture claims. There were late marriages between young women and ancient veterans that the newspapers politely called pension romances. Some widows drew Civil War money into the 1950s, and the last documented pension daughter of a veteran carried her check into the 21st century. Now read this system through the channel's ledger because it teaches 3 lessons that will run under everything to come. Lesson 1. A pension is never just money, it is politics wearing money's clothes. The pension rolls grew because votes grew them one election at a time. Lesson 2, and this one is documented in the sharpest way possible, the system covered Union veterans. A Confederate veteran got whatever his impoverished southern state could scrape together, which was usually close to nothing. And the ordinary worker, the mill worker, the seamstress, the man who had never worn a uniform, got the poorhouse. America's first retirement system was generous, enormous, and rationed by category. Remember that word, category. It returns in 1935 with consequences that still echo. Lesson 3, the whole system died, not in scandal, in actuarial silence. The veterans aged, the veterans passed, the rolls shrank, and by the 1920s, the great pension machine was folding in on itself, leaving no successor. The country that had once spent $4.10 on its old soldiers went back for everyone else to the chair by the stove and the building over the hill. Which means the modern pension, the one for everybody, did not begin in America at all. It began in Berlin, in the mind of a man who despised almost everything it would come to stand for. The Iron Chancellor's Bargain. Berlin, 1889. Chimney smoke lies over the factory districts like a second sky. Gaslit trams run past tenements where 3 families share a stairwell. The German Empire is 18 years old, industrializing at a gallop, and terrified of its own workers. What Otto von Bismarck signs into law this year, the Otto von Bismarck pension, as it's remembered, is about to become the birth certificate of every retirement system that follows it, including the one waiting for Ida May 61 years and an ocean away. Socialism is spreading through the factory districts faster than the police can ban its newspapers. The Chancellor, Otto von Bismarck, has spent a decade trying to crush it with prohibition laws, and it keeps growing. So the old aristocrat, a man who broke 3 countries in war to build his empire, reaches for a weapon nobody expects: generosity. If the workers are drifting toward revolution because the state gives them nothing, then let the state give them something. Sickness insurance, accident insurance, and in 1889, the capstone, the world's first national old age pension. Work your life, pay your contributions, and when you can work no more, the Reich itself will pay you. Bismarck was perfectly frank about the purpose, in private and near enough in public. A man with a pension coming is a man with something to lose. He does not man barricades, he waits. The pension was not a gift to socialism, it was a moat against it. The socialists understood this perfectly and fought the bill, furious at being outflanked by their own demands. Now the myth, because this is where one of the most repeated facts on the internet was born. You have heard it. They set the retirement age where they did because nobody lived that long. A promise designed never to be paid. Let's take it apart, piece by piece, because the record is delicious. First, Bismarck's original pension age was not 65. It was 70. Germany lowered it to 65 in 1916, 18 years after Bismarck was dead. So the famous Bismarck chose 65 is wrong on its face. File that half under invented. Second, the sharper half, nobody lived that long. This one runs on a statistical illusion, and once you see it, you'll see it everywhere. Life expectancy at birth in that era really was in the 40s, but that number was dragged down by a brutal fact. Enormous numbers of children died before their 5th birthday. Life expectancy at birth is an average, and the graveyard of infants poisons the average. The question that matters for a pension is different. If a man survived to adulthood and reached the pension age, how long would he draw checks? And the answer in Bismarck's Germany and everywhere since was years. A German who reached 70 could expect to collect for a meaningful stretch. A worker who reached 65 in the America of 1935 could expect, on average, around a dozen more years of life. The pension was never a promise to the dead. It was a real promise to real survivors, smaller than today's, because fewer workers survived to collect, but real, paid, and budgeted for. The "they knew you'd die first" version is a cynic's bedtime story. File it, the age of 70 and the later cut to 65, documented. Set so nobody would collect, invented. And one detail the record hands us like a gift. In 1889, the year the pension became law, Otto von Bismarck was 74 years old, already past his own qualifying age, still running an empire, and living proof against his own myth. He would draw breath until 83. The German model spread the way successful machines do. Denmark, Britain, and one country after another built versions of it. The idea crossed every border in the industrial world with one glaring exception, the United States, which would hold out for almost half a century, insisting that pensions were un-American, that thrift and family would provide. But while American government held out, American business did not. Because a railroad had discovered something interesting. A pension is not only a moat against socialism, it is also a leash. The gold watch machine. The first private pension plan in American history was created in 1875 by a company you know for a very different product today, American Express, then not a card company but a freight and express business, all wagons, rails, and ledgers. The railroads followed within a few years, and the Baltimore and Ohio built the template the industrial world would copy. And it's worth pausing on why railroads, of all businesses, invented the corporate pension. Because none of the reasons was kindness. Reason one, safety. A railroad is a machine that kills people when operated by failing eyes and slowing reflexes. And in the era before retirement, old railroad men simply did not leave. The pension was, bluntly, a way to remove aging engineers from the throttle without provoking a strike, a severance dressed as an honor. Reason two, the deeper one, loyalty, or rather the enforceable kind. These early pensions almost universally required decades of continuous service, 20, 30 years with the same company. Join a union agitation, get fired at 55, and every year of your pension credit evaporated. The pension was a golden chain. The longer you wore it, the more it cost to take off. Managers of the era discuss this openly in their own literature. The pension as discipline, as strike insurance, as a tool for shaping a docile senior workforce. Reason three, and here's the clause that will detonate 60 years later. Nearly all of these plans were discretionary. Read the fine print of a classic railroad pension and you find language a modern lawyer would gasp at. The pension is a gratuity. It creates no contractual right. The company may amend or withdraw it at any time. The gold watch, in other words, was a gift, and gifts can be taken back. Through the 1910s and 1920s, this system, historians call it welfare capitalism, spread across corporate America. Pensions, company doctors, company towns, company picnics. By the late 1920s, hundreds of major firms had plans on paper, covering millions of workers on paper. On paper. Because now ask the only question that ever matters in this series. The question we asked about the Rothschild couriers, about the Fed's gold, about the dollar's promise at Bretton Woods. What exactly is standing behind the promise? Behind the German pension stood the Reich, a state with a tax base and an army. Behind the American corporate pension stood the company, its profits, its solvency, its continued existence. A worker's entire old age, resting on the assumption that one particular business would still be alive and still be willing 40 years after the promise was made. For an era that believed prosperity was permanent, that seemed fine. That era had an expiration date. October 1929. The crash that ate the old. You know the Depression through its famous pictures, the bread lines, the dust, the shanty towns. Tonight, look at the same catastrophe through one specific lens, what it did to everyone in this story's machine. The family ledger, the oldest pension of all, broke first. Children cannot feed their parents when they cannot feed themselves. A quarter of the workforce was unemployed. Adult sons moved back in with the old, not the reverse. The chair by the stove was still there, but the stove was cold. The banks broke second, and with them the thrift the moralists had preached. A lifetime of careful saving deposited in the town bank vanished in a morning when the bank failed, and thousands of banks failed. No deposit insurance existed. The old couple who had done everything right stood in the same line as the spendthrift, holding the same worthless passbook. And the corporate pension, the gold watch machine, did exactly what its fine print always said it could. Companies in trouble discovered that a gratuity creating no contractual right could be cut, suspended, or canceled, and hundreds were. Firms died, and their pension promises died intestate. Workers with 25 years of continuous service were laid off at 58, 3 years short of vesting, perfectly legal, and it happened at scale. By the early 1930s, the arithmetic of old age in America had collapsed into a single grim consensus. By most estimates, something like half or more of the elderly could no longer support themselves. The poorhouses, those gray buildings we visited, were overflowing, and the counties that ran them were themselves going broke. And here we have to mark something carefully, because it is the emotional hinge of this entire episode. What broke in the Depression was not just income, it was the story. For a century, American culture had insisted that old age poverty was a moral verdict, the wages of idleness, the proof of imprudence. Then the Depression bankrupted the prudent by the million in public all at once. The savers lost their savings in bank runs. The loyal lost their pensions in fine print. The hard-working lost their jobs to a chart. Nobody could look at a 70-year-old former foreman selling apples and honestly call it a character flaw. Once poverty in old age stopped being a sin, it became something else, a grievance. And in a democracy, a grievance with millions of holders is a weapon looking for a hand. The hand it found belonged to a 66-year-old unemployed country doctor in Long Beach, California, a man with no money, no organization, and no political experience whatsoever. Within 2 years, he would have Washington terrified. The Doctor's Army. The story Francis Townsend told, polished no doubt in the retelling, is that one morning in 1933 he looked out his window and saw elderly women bent over garbage cans hunting for food. Whatever the exact spark, what the retired doctor did next is a matter of record. He wrote a letter to the Long Beach newspaper proposing a plan of majestic simplicity. The government should pay every American over 60 a pension of $200 a month, a princely sum, roughly a comfortable salary, on 2 conditions. The pensioner must retire, freeing a job for the young, and the pensioner must spend every dollar within 30 days, flooding the debt economy with demand. The whole thing to be funded by a small tax on every transaction in the country. Economists lined up to explain that the arithmetic did not work, that the plan would consume something approaching half the national income to serve a tenth of the population. They were, on the numbers, essentially right. It did not matter in the slightest. The letter detonated. Within 2 years, the Townsend movement counted thousands of clubs and, by its own claims and sympathetic counts, membership in the millions, with petitions said to carry many millions of signatures. Townsend clubs met in church basements and grange halls in every state. Gray-haired, respectable, furious, and organized. They sang songs, they published a newspaper, and they did the one thing that transmutes grievance into power. They voted, and they told their congressmen exactly what for. Washington had seen radical movements before. It had never seen this demographic radicalized. These were not the young militants the police knew how to club. These were grandmothers, deacons, retired school teachers, the moral bedrock of every district in the country, suddenly demanding what sounded like revolution and calling it justice. And Townsend was not alone. Huey Long was roaring, "Share our wealth," from the Senate. Upton Sinclair nearly took California, promising to end poverty outright. A radio priest was mixing pensions and grievance for an audience of tens of millions. Franklin Roosevelt, 2 years into the New Deal, could read the convergence as well as anyone. If respectable old America concluded that the system offered them nothing but the poorhouse, they would vote for whoever promised the most. Arithmetic be damned. His response has become one of the most quoted maneuvers in American political history. Roosevelt told his cabinet, in effect, "We must have a real old age program, sound, contributory, permanent, or the Townsendites and the Longs will force through an unsound one." The Townsend Plan never passed. It never came close. And it is, by any fair reading, one of the most successful failures in American history. The battering ram that never breached the wall itself, but forced the defenders to open the gate and build something real behind it. What they built behind it was drafted through 1934 by a committee working under the first woman ever to sit in a president's cabinet. Her name was Frances Perkins, and the file on her desk would become the most important domestic law of the 20th century. The Act. Frances Perkins had watched women jump from the windows of a burning shirtwaist factory in 1911 and had spent the rest of her life turning that afternoon into legislation. When Roosevelt asked her to be Secretary of Labor, she handed him a list of conditions, unemployment insurance, old age insurance among them, and by her account, he accepted the list. She chaired the Committee on Economic Security through 1934, and what emerged, signed on August 14, 1935, was the Social Security Act. Look at the design, because every choice was an argument won or lost. It would be contributory, funded by a payroll tax, starting in 1937 at 1% from the worker and 1% from the employer on the first $3,000 of wages. This was economics, but above all, it was armor. Roosevelt said it plainly in a remark preserved in 1,000 histories. The taxes were there to give contributors a legal, moral, and political right to their benefits, so that, in his words, no damn politician could ever scrap the program. He was building the third rail on purpose. It would pay at 65, and no, before the myth reaches for it again, not because Americans died at 62. The committee's own records show the reasoning. Germany and half the existing state and private systems use 65. The actuaries ran the numbers, and 65 balanced the books at a bearable tax rate, and a man reaching 65 in 1935 could expect to collect for roughly a dozen years. The age was a budget decision, not a bet on funerals, documented. It would be insurance, not charity. Perkins and Roosevelt insisted on the vocabulary, benefits earned, not granted. no means test, no Poorhouse superintendent inspecting your cupboard. The whole design was a machine for delivering money with dignity, the precise thing the gray building over the hill had been designed to strip away. And now the clause we cannot walk past because we told you the word category would return. The act, as passed in 1935, excluded agricultural laborers and domestic servants, farmhands and maids. On paper, an administrative line, and the administrative argument was real. Collecting payroll taxes from 1 million scattered farm kitchens in 1935 with ledger books and postage stamps was a genuine nightmare, and several European systems had started with similar exclusions. But the line did not fall on the population evenly, and everyone in the room could count. Those two categories held roughly half the country's black workers, by many counts more, across the South the large majority. The committee chairs who controlled the bill's fate in Congress were overwhelmingly Southern Democrats presiding over exactly that labor system. Historians still argue with real scholarship on both sides over how much was administrative caution and how much was the price those chairmen quietly charged for passage. We will not fake a resolution the archives don't offer. What is documented is the result. The greatest anti-poverty machine in American history switched on with millions of the poorest workers standing outside it, and the coverage gaps took decades into the 1950s to close. Both lines go in the ledger, the dignity and the door. The act crawled through Congress, survived the Supreme Court by inches, survived a 1936 election fought partly against it, and in 1939 was amended into its mature shape, adding benefits for widows and dependents and moving the first monthly checks up to 1940, which returns us to a snowy post office in Ludlow, Vermont, and a retired legal secretary reaching for an envelope. Check number 1. Ida Mae Fuller, by the way, had not planned any of it. She stopped by the Rutland Social Security office, she later said, not expecting money. She just figured she'd paid something in and might as well ask. The clerk took her name. The machinery turned. And on January 31st, 1940, Check 00-000-001 made her the first retiree in the history of the American Promise. $24.75 in, nearly $23,000 out, 100 years old. Now use her, as we promised in the opening, to understand the machine's soul. Because everything the internet gets wrong about Social Security is standing right there in Ida Mae's arithmetic. Where did her $23,000 come from? Not from her contributions. Those wouldn't have covered her first 2 years. Not from a vault with her name on it. No such vault ever existed. Every check Ida Mae cashed was paid from the payroll taxes of people working at that moment. 1940s machinists paid for her 40s. 1960s secretaries paid for her 60s. That is the design. It has a name, pay-as-you-go, and it is not a secret, not a flaw, and not a heist. It is how nearly every national pension on Earth works and how the family farm worked for 10,000 years before it. The working feed the old in exchange for the same promise when their turn comes. Social Security did not replace the intergenerational contract. It nationalized it, took the deal between a farmer and his sons, and rewrote it between 100 million strangers with the Treasury as the kitchen table. Hold that firmly because both of tonight's biggest myths live in this room. The people who call the system a Ponzi scheme have noticed something true. Early participants like Ida Mae got back vastly more than they paid, and the machine depends on new contributors, and then bolted it to something false. A Ponzi scheme is a secret, a fraud that must lie about its mechanics and collapse when recruiting stalls. Pay-as-you-go is the opposite of a secret. Its mechanics are published every single year in public trustees' reports with 75-year projections attached. A Ponzi hides its arithmetic. Social Security's entire political problem is that it publishes its arithmetic. We'll read those tables together before the night is out, and the people who say, "I paid in, it's my money, it's sitting in my account," the friendly myth, the one your uncle believes, are wrong in the mirror image way. There is no account. There never was. There is a promise, enforced by law, funded by the next shift of workers, exactly as Ida May's was, which means the entire system rests, as every system in this series has rested, on one load-bearing beam. Not gold, not a trust fund. The beam is the ratio, how many are working for everyone who is collecting. In 1945, that ratio was more than 40 workers per beneficiary. Remember the number. It is the wheel under everything, and we are going to watch it turn. In 1940, a promise became real when a name was typed onto a card. This series runs on something smaller but similar, names on a ledger. If these histories earn their minutes, put yours on ours. Subscribe. It costs nothing, and it tells the wheel to keep turning. Now, the golden age. Enjoy it while it lasts. Everyone did. The golden age of the gold watch. For about 25 years after the war, the American retirement machine ran the way the brochures promised. And it's important to sit in this era for a few minutes, because this is the picture in everyone's head when they say retirement is being broken. This is the thing people believe they were promised. The breakthrough came in 1950 in Detroit. General Motors and Walter Reuther's United Auto Workers signed a 5-year contract so consequential the press named it like an armistice, the Treaty of Detroit. Wages tied to productivity, health benefits, and a real funded contractual pension. Not a revocable gratuity in the old railroad style, an obligation. What one treaty establishes in Detroit, pattern bargaining spreads everywhere. Steel followed autos, rubber followed steel, and non-union companies matched the packages to keep the unions out. Through the 50s and 60s, the defined benefit pension became the signature of good American employment. Study the name because its meaning is the whole era. What was defined, what was guaranteed, was the benefit. A formula. Years of service times a slice of final salary, payable monthly, for life, no matter what markets did. Every risk in that sentence, investment risk, longevity risk, inflation risk, sat on the company's books, not the workers' kitchen table. Policy people describe the mature system as a three-legged stool: Social Security, the floor beneath everyone, the company pension, the guaranteed formula, and private savings on top. 3 legs, 3 different failure modes. The theory went, a stool that could not easily tip. And the era built something genuinely new under the sun. For the first time in human history, an ordinary 68-year-old with no land and no working children could be, routinely, unremarkably, fine. Golf existed for machinists. Florida and Arizona filled with entire cities invented for the retired. The first great active adult developments opened their gates in 1960 to lines of buyers. Elderly poverty, which had been the default human condition since the Ice Age, began a 40-year collapse from the majority experience toward the single digits. If this series has a candidate for the Wheel of Fortune's single kindest turn, this is it. Now, the ledger, because nostalgia is a myth factory, and this era is its best-selling product. Everyone had a pension back then. Exaggerated, and by a wide margin. Private pension coverage at its historic peak, roughly the early 1970s, reached only around half of private sector workers, and many counts put the durable full career coverage meaningfully lower. The Treaty of Detroit covered Detroit, the unionized industrial core, disproportionately male, disproportionately white in big firms. The waitress, the farmhand, the clerk at a small business. For tens of millions, the stool had 2 legs or 1, and the golden age carried 2 quiet passengers. First, the ratio, remember the ratios, was sliding all along, from more than 40 workers per beneficiary in 1945 to about 16 in 1950, toward 5 by 1960, on its way to 3. The math still worked. The direction never changed. Second, every one of those beautiful defined benefit formulas rested exactly where the railroad pensions had rested, on the eternal life of the sponsoring company. And in December of 1963, in South Bend, Indiana, America found out what happens when the company dies first. The broken promise of South Bend. Studebaker was not some fly-by-night. It had been building vehicles since it built wagons for the Union Army, one of the oldest names in American transport, the pride of South Bend, Indiana, a company town in the fullest sense. Its pension plan, won by the auto workers in the Treaty of Detroit era, was exactly the guaranteed formula we just described. In December 1963, Studebaker closed its South Bend works, snow settling on a padlocked gate, a time clock stopped mid-punch, the assembly line's overhead conveyor hanging still and silent above cold concrete. The company had been losing its war with the Big Three for years, and its pension fund, it turned out, held nowhere near enough to cover the promises on its books. The plan was terminated, and the money that existed was triaged. Workers already retired kept their pensions, but thousands of workers in their 40s and 50s, men with 20, 30, even 40 years of service, vested by every rule of the plan, received a settlement worth roughly 15 cents on the dollar of what they've been promised. Thousands more, the younger ones, received nothing at all. A 60-year-old founder's family machinist who had done literally everything the system asked, the loyalty, the decades, the deferrals, walked away with a fraction of a pension and no time left to rebuild. There was no scandal in the legal sense. That is the obscenity of it. Nobody had embezzled. The fine print held, as fine print does. An underfunded promise from a dying company was, under the law of 1963, simply a risk the worker had been carrying all along. Most just hadn't known they were carrying it. South Bend did what Jekyll Island's panic did in 1907. It converted an abstract flaw into faces. The Studebaker men became the exhibit in hearings and newspapers in a decade of union lobbying for a question Washington could no longer wave off: what stands behind a pension promise? For the German system, the state. For Social Security, the taxing power. For the corporate pension, nothing but the corporation, and corporations die. It took 11 years, a filibuster of studies, drafts, and industry resistance, but in September 1974, the answer was signed into law, ERISA, the Employee Retirement Income Security Act. Funding standards with teeth, promises must be backed by actual money set aside on a schedule, vesting rights, your earned pension becomes yours, portable past the fine print. Fiduciary duties, the people running the fund must run it for you at legal peril, and a backstop with a Fed-like flavor, the Pension Benefit Guarantee Corporation, an insurer of last resort that pays within limits when a covered plan dies anyway. ERISA is one of the least famous laws that governs your life, and inside its hundreds of pages, Congress also planted something small, the individual retirement account, a tax-sheltered pot for workers with no plan at all. Keep your eye on that seed, the individual account, the worker as his own pension manager. It looked like a footnote. Because the strange truth of the next chapter is this: the law that perfected the corporate pension also marks, almost to the year, the beginning of its extinction. Companies read ERISA's new price tag, real funding, real liability, real insurance premiums, and began quietly to look for the exit. They found it 4 years later in 2 paragraphs of tax code that nobody was even looking at. The accident. Every other machine in this series was designed. The Fed was drafted in 9 days of deliberate secrecy. Bretton Woods was engineered clause by clause. The machine that holds your retirement, the one with the trillions in it, was not designed at all. It was found, like a coin on the sidewalk. Which makes the history of the 401k the strangest origin story in this entire series. No committee, no ribbon cutting, no architect's portrait on the wall, just a tax lawyer at a beige office desk in the Philadelphia suburbs, fluorescent light overhead, reading a paragraph nobody else had bothered to read twice. In the Revenue Act of 1978, Congress inserted a modest provision, Section 401, subsection K, aimed at settling a narrow, sleepy dispute about executive compensation, whether high earners could defer bonus money pre-tax into a company plan. The section drew almost no debate, no headlines, no floor speeches. It took effect in January 1980 with the approximate fanfare of a parking regulation. No one, not its drafters, not the Treasury, not a single newspaper, described it as a new national retirement system. Enter Ted Benna, a benefits consultant at a small firm outside Philadelphia, a numbers man with a Bible on his desk, hired in 1980 to redesign a bank's retirement plan. Reading the news section for a client, Benna noticed what its authors apparently had not. Nothing in the text limited the trick to executives or bonuses. Read one way, his way. Any employee could divert a slice of ordinary salary, pre-tax, into an account, and nothing prevented the employer from matching part of it, converting a tax clause into an incentive machine for everyone in the building. The bank he designed it for got nervous and declined to be first. So Benna installed the plan at his own small company. In 1981, the IRS issued rules blessing the salary reduction reading. And then corporate America did something that should sound familiar from every episode of this series. It looked at 2 doors and walked at a run through the cheaper one. Understand exactly what made the new door irresistible. This is the pivot of the entire episode. A defined benefit pension, post-ERISA, was a promise. Fund it through bear markets, carry it on the balance sheet, insure it, pay actuaries to certify it, and own every risk for as long as your oldest retiree draws breath. A 401k was a contribution. Match a few percent of payroll this year, and the company's obligation ends on payday. Markets crash, the account crashes, the worker's account. Retiree lives to 100 like Ida May, the account runs dry, the worker's account. Every risk the Treaty of Detroit had moved onto company books moved back across the kitchen table in a single generation. Nobody voted on that transfer. No president announced it. There was no Studebaker moment, no hearings with weeping machinists, because nothing had visibly broken. The old system was simply priced out by the new one, plan by plan, year by year. Freeze the pension for new hires, offer the match, repeat across the economy for 30 years. Follow the direction of travel and you find the great inversion. At the start of the 1980s, the guaranteed pension was the norm among covered private workers, and the 401k barely existed. Within a generation, the proportions had fully reversed, and today the classic private sector defined benefit plan is a near-extinct species outside government work. And the man who found the coin on the sidewalk. Ted Benna has spent his later decades as the ghost at the feast. giving interview after interview on the record, saying the thing he discovered was meant to be a supplement and became, against all intention, the whole stool. The word he keeps reaching for, the word that makes every headline, is monster. The father of the 401k did not mean your retirement plan as a compliment. The great risk shift. Let's slow down and weigh what actually changed hands, because defined benefit to defined contribution is the kind of phrase that anesthetizes exactly the people it's happening to. Under the old formula, the company was the casino and the worker held a guarantee. Under the new one, the worker is the casino, chief investment officer, chief actuary, and sole bearer of every table's odds, usually with no training and 45 minutes a year of attention. Count the risks that cross the table, investment risk crossed. If markets stagnate for the decade before you retire, that is now purely your problem. The formula that once absorbed it is gone. Longevity risk crossed, and this one is crueler than it sounds. A pension paid until you died, whether that took 5 years or 35. The plan pooled the lucky and the unlucky, like all insurance. An account simply holds a number, and you must guess your own funeral date. Guess long, you die frugal and leave money unlived. Guess short, you outlive the account. And the fastest growing age bracket in America is over 85. Timing risk crossed. Retire into a bull market and you're a genius. Retire into a crash and identical lifetime savings, buy a different life. Your birth year became an investment position. The burden of participation crossed. A pension enrolled you by existing. A 401k for its first decades required you to volunteer, to fill out the form, pick the funds, and raid your own paycheck while young, broke, and busy. Millions simply never did, and the system's answer for a generation was a shrug marketed as freedom, and one risk was newly created: fees. A percent here for the fund, a fraction there for administration. Sums that sound like rounding errors and behave like termites. Compound a seemingly polite annual fee across a 40-year account, and it can quietly consume a quarter or more of the final balance. The old pension negotiated fees with institutional muscle. The new system charged them to millions of individuals who never read page 40 of anything, and an industry grew fat in the gap, which is one reason the financial industry lobbied for this world and has defended it at every legislative hearing since, like a walled city. Was anything gained? Honesty requires the other column. Portability was gained. The golden chain broke, and the job-hopping modern worker carries an account no company can hold hostage. Transparency of a kind was gained. Your number is your number, visible daily, which the old opaque promise never was. Ownership is real. Studebaker cannot happen to money that is legally yours. And for the diligent, high-earning, steadily employed saver who starts early, the system's brochure protagonist, the 401k has genuinely built fortunes the old formula never would have. But notice the shape of who wins. The new machine is superb for exactly the people who needed help least, and harshest on irregular earners, late starters, the laid off, the sick, the unlucky, the very people insurance exists to pool. We did not merely change instruments in the 1980s. We repealed the insurance and kept the word retirement on the box. The wheel's oldest trick, performed in fluorescent light, the risk never disappears. It only moves, and it always moves toward whoever has the least power to refuse it. Every family in this audience holds a chapter of this story: a pension that vanished, a match that saved someone, a parent still working at 74. Which promise broke first in your family? The companies, the governments, or the markets? Write it below. We read everything, and the sharpest ledger entries get pinned. The quiet cut. While the corporate leg of the stool was being swapped out in silence, the government leg hit its own crisis, loudly. And the way Washington fixed it in 1983 is a masterclass in how promises to you actually get rewritten, not with an announcement, but with a phase-in. The problem was the ratio, right on schedule, compounded by the brutal 1970s. Inflation index benefits meeting stagflation and a flawed indexing formula. By 1982, the trustees' table said the unthinkable plainly: within months, the system would not meet full benefits. The third rail was shorting out. So Washington did the thing it now seems incapable of doing. It convened a bipartisan commission, chaired by an economist named Alan Greenspan 4 years before the Fed chair from our last episode's ending, locked Republicans and Democrats in a room with the actuarial tables, and split the pain. Read the 1983 deal's 3 moves closely. They are the template for whatever is coming in the 2030s. Move 1, taxes up sooner. Scheduled payroll tax increases were accelerated. The self-employed rate rose. Move 2, benefits down, disguised. Up to half of benefits became taxable for higher-income retirees. A benefit cut wearing a tax's clothing, the first thread of means testing sewn into a program built to have none. And Move 3, the one that concerns you personally if you were born after 1959. The retirement age was raised from 65 to 67. But not for anyone who could vote angrily about it that November. The increase was phased in over decades, landing fully on workers born in 1960 and later, people who in 1983 were toddlers or unborn. It stands among the largest benefit cuts in American history, and it passed almost without public mourning because its victims were children. Mark the technique, grandfather the present, cut the future, let the phase-in do the politics. You will see it again. The 1983 fix worked, and its success manufactured tonight's most durable myth. Because the deal deliberately overcollected for decades, the boomers uniquely were made to pay for their parents' benefits and pre-fund a cushion for their own. The surplus payroll taxes piled up in the trust fund, which by law invests in one and only one thing: special issue United States Treasury bonds. The cash is lent to the government, the fund holds the bonds earn interest and are redeemed on demand. That is the entire mechanism, from which the internet built the heist. The government raided the trust fund. It's empty. There's nothing but I owe us in a filing cabinet. Run it through the ledger. That the surplus cash was spent by the Treasury and replaced with bonds, documented, and it is precisely what the law prescribes. A Treasury bond is an IOU of the United States, the same instrument behind every pension fund and central bank on the planet, redeemed in full, on schedule, every year including this one. What would make the raid real is a default on those bonds, which has never happened. File it, cash lent to Treasury, documented. Stolen and gone, exaggerated to the point of invention, usually by someone selling either gold or a ballot. The real problem with the trust fund was never theft. It's simpler and worse. It was always a cushion, not a solution. It was built to absorb the boomers' retirement, and the boomers retired. The fund has been drawing down for years, and the tables in the trustees' reports now print in plain type the year the cushion runs out. Before we read that page, though, the market leg of the stool has 2 more lessons to teach, taught the way markets teach everything, by demonstration. 2 demonstrations. Demonstration 1, Houston, autumn 2001. Picture the Houston trading floor at its peak, glass tower, ticking stock tickers on every wall, the company's crooked E logo lit up 40 stories above the freeway. Enron was the 7th largest company in America by revenue, the smartest firm in every room, and its employees believed, because everything around them screamed it, that the stock was destiny. The company matched 401k contributions in its own shares. The culture cheered concentration, and by the end, a majority of the company plan's value sat in Enron stock. The three-legged stool for thousands of Houston families had been quietly whittled into a single leg made of the same wood as their paychecks. You know the collapse. What belongs in this story is the mechanism of the wound. As the stock entered freefall, the plan happened to enter an administrative blackout, a routine changeover window during which employees could not sell, while in the same weeks, executives unloading their own separate holdings were bound by no such freeze. By the time the dust settled, workers who had spent 20 years building six-figure accounts held statements worth a used car. Congressional hearings filled with 60-year-old Texans reading their balances aloud, from hundreds of thousands to almost nothing weeks before retirement. Enron was fraud, and fraud is exceptional, but the retirement lesson it taught was structural, not criminal. The new system contained no adult in the room, no fiduciary formula stopping a worker from betting everything on one stock, least of all the employers. The reforms that followed loosened lockdowns and forced diversification rights, but the deep setting remained. You are the actuary now, even of your own worst instincts. Demonstration 2 arrived 7 years later and skipped nobody. In 2008, the machine at the center of Episode 2 failed at its job, the housing system collapsed, and inside about 15 months, American retirement accounts shed trillions of dollars in value. The standard estimates run past $2 trillion in the first year alone. The gallows joke on every break room wall wrote itself, "My 401k is a 201k." But the crash's real lesson was the one from our risk ledger, timing. A 30-year-old's 201k had decades to heal and healed. A 62-year-old's did not. The crash caught an entire cohort at the exact wrong moment, and their responses filled the labor statistics of the following decade. Retirements postponed for years, retirees unretiring into greeter jobs, the over 65 labor force climbing back toward rates unseen since before the golden age. Two people, identical careers, identical thrift, born 5 years apart, retiring into two different worlds. Under the old formula, that difference was the plan's problem. Now it was a birthdays, and 2008 exposed the stool's final secret: the legs are not independent. The theory said 3 legs, 3 separate failure modes. The reality, home equity, stock accounts, and job security all collapsing in the same 18 months for the same reason, said otherwise. When the storm is big enough, every leg turns out to be planted in the same floor, which brings us at last out of history and into the present tense. Time to do what this channel does: put the actual numbers on the table, yours, roughly speaking, and read them without either the sales pitch or the panic. The arithmetic of now. Everything in this chapter comes from public data, census surveys, the Federal Reserve's household finance studies, the trustees' tables, and everything is stated in rough rounded terms because precision theater is its own kind of lie. As of the mid-2020s, here is the American Retirement Ledger. Start with access because the brochure assumes it. Roughly half of private sector workers at any given moment have no retirement plan at work at all, no pension, no 401k, no match. Not chose not to join, have none to join, concentrated among small employers, part-timers, and the gig economy, which has engineered an entire labor class with, by design, no employer to sponsor anything. For that half of working America, the three-legged stool was never delivered. The debate about fund fees is a conversation happening in a building they've never entered. Now the accounts that do exist. Among households approaching retirement, the 55 to 64 bracket, The median balance for those who have retirement accounts sits, by the Fed's most recent surveys, in the rough neighborhood of $200,000, and a large fraction of that age bracket, by many counts approaching half, has essentially nothing saved at all, which the medians politely exclude. Is $200,000 a lot? Here the industry's own arithmetic answers. The standard retirement planning rule, the 4% guideline, says a retirement pot can sustainably convert into retirement income at around 4% a year. 4% of $200,000 is $8,000 a year of retirement income, $600 and change a month. That is the median outcome for the households doing better than the bottom half after 4 decades of the world's largest voluntary savings experiment. Which explains the quiet fact underneath everything. Social Security never became the floor of the stool. For most American retirees, it is the load-bearing wall, the majority of income for a large share of the elderly, close to the entirety for a substantial minority. The program, designed in 1935 as a base to build on, has ended up for tens of millions as the building. And the load on that wall is growing on both ends. On one end, the ratio, our 40 workers per beneficiary in 1945, now stands near 2.7, drifting toward the low twos as the boomers finish retiring and birth rates sag. On the other end, the checks last longer than any designer imagined. A 65-year-old today can expect on the order of 20 more years. Retirement has stretched from a brief epilogue into a full active life, a fifth of the whole play, and the fastest-growing group of Americans is past 85. Longer checks, fewer payers, thinner private cushions. None of this is hidden. All of it compounds annually, and every year the trustees of Social Security add up exactly what it means and publish the sum in a table Congress receives, files, and does not act on. That table has a date in it. The date in the table. The date moves slightly with each year's report, but as of the most recent trustees' projections, it sits in the neighborhood of 2033, roughly a decade out. The year the retirement trust funds cushion, the boomers' 1983 prepayment runs dry, now carefully. Because this is where tonight's last great myth lives, and unlike the others, this one is still being manufactured, fresh batches, daily. The myth says, bankruptcy. The system hits the date, the vault is empty, the checks stop, and anyone under 50 gets nothing. Polls find enormous shares of younger workers believing precisely this, planning their lives around a zero. Run the ledger. When the trust fund cushion is gone, the payroll tax does not vanish. Every paycheck in America keeps feeding the system in real time, exactly as paychecks fed Ida Mae Fuller. The trustees themselves publish what that incoming stream would cover. Roughly 80% of scheduled benefits, continuing indefinitely. So the documented do-nothing worst-case scenario, no reform, no deal, total congressional paralysis, is not zero. It is a sudden, ugly, across-the-board cut of about 1/5, hitting every beneficiary, including the ones already retired. That is genuinely bad. It would be the largest broken promise in the program's history, a poverty shock for the millions whose entire wall it is. It deserves the alarm. What it does not resemble is nothing. You'll get nothing is not caution. It is arithmetic illiteracy sold as sophistication. And note, as always in this series, who does the selling? The same decades that spread the bankruptcy myth built fortunes in products marketed as its refuge. Fear of the date is an industry, and the ledger says, the fear is exaggerated precisely by the people invoicing for the cure. Could the cut actually happen? Here, honest history cuts both ways. Against it, the third rail held in 1983, when the fund was months from the edge. The theory being that 60 million voting recipients concentrate the political mind wonderfully. For it, 1983's medicine is harder now. The deficit is structurally larger, the ratio worse, the politics almost comically more broken, and the menu has not changed in 40 years. Raise the payroll cap so high earners contribute on all wages, raise the rate, trim benefits at the top, raise the age again. Each option scored annually by the actuaries, each sufficient in combination, each untouched. And should Washington eventually reach for the 1983 playbook, you already know the shape it will take because you watched it built. Protect current retirees, phase the pain onto the young, let the phase-in do the politics. The retirement age quietly walking from 67 towards 70 for people now in school, announced as prudence, mourned by no one who can vote yet. The promise, in other words, will probably not die on the date in the table. It will be renegotiated, as it was in 1939, 1950, 1983, by whoever shows up to the table. And the people with the most decades at stake are, on every poll, the least likely to believe the table is even real. The wheel does not require your attention to turn. It only requires your absence. Other wheels. Before we close the books, lift your eyes for 3 minutes, because the American design was a choice, and other countries chose differently, and the comparisons read like a controlled experiment. Australia looked at the same 1980s crossroads and in 1992 took the road America left. It made the employer contribution compulsory, superannuation they call it. Every worker, every employer, a legally mandated slice of every wage, currently in the low double digits %, flowing into the worker's own invested account. No opting out, no waiting for the form to be filled in. 3 decades on, Australia has turned a middling savers nation into one of the largest pension pools on Earth, and an ordinary Australian worker retires with a pot that would put them near the top of the American charts. The design isn't magic. Fees and gaps exist there too, but it answered the participation problem the American way refused to. It stopped asking. The Netherlands kept the other leg. Near universal, collectively negotiated occupational pensions layered on a flat state floor, consistently rated among the world's strongest systems, guaranteeing formulas Americans buried with Studebaker. And Japan stands as the stress test every system is walking toward, the oldest large society on Earth, a preview of what ratios in the low twos do to any design whatsoever, and a reminder that demography negotiates with no parliament. The point of the tour is not that the grass is greener. Every one of these systems has its own actuaries sweating over its own tables. The point is narrower and sharper. The specific American fragilities of this episode, half the workforce with no plan, participation by paperwork, risk pooled on the individual, are not laws of nature. They are the 1978 to 1983 settlement, one country's particular accident, frozen by the lobbying of the industries it enriched. Other wheels were available. They still are. Now, the books. The ledger. Documented, exaggerated, invented. 3 columns, one last time, and tonight every line has your name somewhere in it. Documented. The world before. 3 of 4 men over 65 still working in 1880. The Poorhouse in nearly every county. The Civil War pension machine at roughly 40% of the federal budget, rationed by category, dead by attrition. Bismarck's 1889 pension at age 70, cut to 65 only in 1916. American Express, 1875, the railroad's revocable gratuities. The Depression's verdict, half or more of the elderly unable to support themselves. Townsend's millions, the Act of August 1935, the payroll tax as political armor. No damn politician. the exclusion of farm and domestic labor and who stood in that category. Check 00-00-001, $24.75 in, $23,000 out, 100 years. The Treaty of Detroit, coverage peaking near half and never universal. South Bend, 15 cents on the dollar, ERISA, 1974. Section 401K, 1978. An executive tax clause, undebated, Ted Benna, 1980. The great inversion of the plans, the father calling his child a monster. The 1983 template, accelerate taxes, tax benefits, phase the age to 67 onto the unborn. The trust fund in Treasury, bonds by law, redeemed in full every year. Enron's blackout window, 2008's trillions, the unretirements. Half of private workers with no plan at work. The median pot near 200,000, the ratio at 2.7, the date near 2033, the 80% floor beneath it. All of it, tables, statutes, transcripts, exaggerated. Everyone had a pension in the golden age. Coverage never reached much past half of private workers, and the stool's famous three legs were always for tens of millions won. The government raided the trust fund. The cash was lent to the Treasury for bonds because the law commands exactly that. The raid becomes real only on a default that has never occurred. Social Security is a Ponzi scheme. It shares one mechanic with Ponzi's game, pay as you go, and lacks the one that defines it, secrecy. A fraud does not publish 75-year projections of its own shortfall, and the system is bankrupt. The documented worst case is an ugly 20% cut, not a zero. Grim arithmetic inflated into apocalypse, most loudly by sellers of refuge. Invented. Retirement age was set where people died, a promise designed never to be paid. Wrong age, wrong logic, wrong arithmetic. Survivors collected for years, and the Chancellor himself outlived his own threshold by nearly a decade. The 401k was designed as the nation's retirement system. It was designed for no such thing. It was 2 paragraphs about executive bonuses, discovered by a consultant, adopted because it was cheaper, and regretted aloud by its own father. Younger generations will get nothing. No table in 90 years of published projections has ever printed a zero. One promise, 125 years, 3 columns, and underneath all 3, one wheel, which has one more thing to show you before we go. What the wheel reveals. 3 episodes ago, this series began with a claim. Behind every crown, a ledger. A family's couriers, a central bank's charter, a hotel full of exhausted delegates. All of them, underneath the drama, entries in a book of promises. Tonight, the pattern reached your kitchen table. Because look at what retirement actually is, stripped to the ledger. It is credit, the same substance as every episode of this show. A pension is a loan you extend across time to a counterparty who will repay you decades from now. The only question that has ever mattered for Napoleon's bankers, for the Fed's founders, for the men at Bretton Woods, is the question you should now hear in your own statements: who is the counterparty and what compels them to pay? Your grandfather's counterparty was his children, compelled by love and the village. The railroad man's was a corporation, compelled by nothing, and South Bend collected on that clause. The Social Security check's counterparty is the next generation of workers, compelled by law and 60 million votes. The 401k's counterparty is the market itself, the least sentimental payer of all, magnificent across 40 years, merciless across the wrong 5. Notice what the 125-year journey did. It did not eliminate the oldest deal in the human story, the young feeding the old against the promise of their turn. It industrialized it, from the farmhouse to the company to the state to the index fund. each transfer trading warmth for scale, each new counterparty more powerful and more distant than the last. And at every single handoff, the fine print was written by the party with the lawyers, and the risk drifted, as risk always drifts, toward whoever had the least power to refuse it. That is the retirement lie of our title, and notice it was never one lie told once. It is a layer of lies, each era's ledger dressed as a law of nature. The Poorhouse era's lie that old age poverty was a sin, the Gold Watch era's lie that the gratuity was a right, the Golden Age's lie that everyone was covered. Our era's lie that a tax clause found on a sidewalk is a retirement system, and the twin lies about the future, the comfortable one that nothing needs to change and the profitable one that nothing can be saved. The record says otherwise in both directions. The record says the promise has been broken before, in 1929 in South Bend in the fine print, and remade before in 1935, in 1974, in 1983, each time by people who showed up while it was being rewritten. Nothing about the ledger is finished. The pen moves in the 2030s, whether or not your generation's hand is on it. Every crown, a ledger. Every ledger, a promise. Every promise, a wheel turning on the faith of people not yet old. It is turning right now. Listen. The wheel turns again. We began with a check in the Vermont snow, the first payment on the biggest promise a government ever made, $22.54, and 100 million futures signed underneath. 86 years later, the promise is still being paid and still being rewritten the way it has always been rewritten, quietly in phase-ins and fine print by whoever bothers to hold the pen. That, in the end, is why this channel exists. Not to sell you the panic and not to sell you the lullaby. The ledger doesn't care which one you bought. Our job is older and simpler. Read the book, mark what's documented, burn what's invented, and hand you the record while there's still time to use it. The wheel has more of these stories than we will ever finish telling. Dynasties that mistook the wheel for a throne. Panics that built empires and empires that died of fine print. Promises the size of nations, resting on a signature, a ratio, a belief. Pick the next one. The screen in front of you is full of them, and keep turning the wheel with us. If tonight's ledger earned it, subscribe, and bring someone who still believes the retirement age myth. They're owed a correction, gently. This has been Fortuna's wheel, and the wheel is still turning. It always is. Even now, especially now, while somewhere a clerk is typing the next name onto the next card.